A joke was told. The listeners will have no idea. They'll just hear the episode starting off with us laughing.
Yeah, Socrates would not like it either, man.
Right. Yeah, he does talk about ridicule
talk
in this
about
book,
it.
right? So welcome to book 5, aka Sex in the City. We have to decide. We have to decide what we're going to call this podcast episode. But we're going to begin book 5. But before we do that, we're going to take a quick minute to summarize book 4, because there was a lot of interesting and important concepts that were elaborated there. So, with book 4, the social structure of the city was established and its 3 classes. The Socrates and his interlocutors identified justice in a deductive manner. So using the framework of the 4 cardinal virtues, which we will sometimes call the 4 aspects of virtue, since the other thing that we talked about was the fact that virtue is probably better thought of as a Unitarian concept, where each of the so-called virtues actually represents a particular aspect of this unifying concept that we and other philosophers would point to as what leads to well-being, which is what you can think of as virtue. And so using the 4 cardinal virtues, which are wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice, Socrates and his interlocutors identify the first 3 within the city, and then to decide to allocate whatever's left, quote unquote, whatever good is left in the city as justice. So they begin by identifying wisdom in the city, which they describe simply as the prudence of the rulers. And so you have a very good working definition of prudence.
Right, that's practical wisdom. Right. It's the kind of wisdom that you get by going through life and acquiring information as you go through it. So if you come upon a problem, you try a solution and a potential solution, and it works or it doesn't work, and you learn from that. And you come upon the problem the next time, you try something else, or you try the same thing. Eventually, you gain this experience that comes with living a life, and that is prudence. Mm-hmm. And it's a lived experience in a way. So prudence in a state would be the rulers have this practical wisdom. They know what the right thing to do is, based on the fact that they have had experience with it. And prudence at an individual level would be that one's rational principle, just by going through life, understands what is good and what's evil, what should be feared and what should not.
Right. So there's an acumen component to wisdom, which is what you reap from living in conversation with life events and that sort of thing. So that knowledge, the longevity of that knowledge, is what you could describe as prudence. And then they identified courage within the city, which they identified as the preservation and adherence in principle and in action to the beliefs about what is rightly feared, in this case, decadence and corruption and other things that lead to corrupting effects, and rightly pursued, which would be unity, parsimony, and harmony within the city. And this is the main job of the guardians, right?
Correct. So you want to be, the courage is the ability to hold, what is to be feared as feared, and to hold what is to be pursued as to be pursued, no matter
regardless of the conditions.
Right. No matter the pressure that you get from outside the walls.
Right. So Socrates uses the analogy is the fastness of the dye that you used to color the material that has been prepared through training and indoctrination.
Right.
So. And then temperance was identified as the order, harmony, and the mastery of itself as it pertains to the appetites of the masses in this case. And so the city is mastered by the rulers, and the city itself has mastery over its pleasures and appetites and of itself. So you can just think of this as the discipline of the citizens and the agreement amongst the citizens, the rulers, and the guardians as to who ought to rule.
Correct.
Right.
So the order of things is maintained by temperance. So the rational principle rules, the guardians carry out the dictates of the rational principle, and then that the workers do the job that needs to be done, perform the action, but don't take over the decision making. And that is order or temperance.
Right. And that leads right into what was left, which is what they identified as justice. And so the evolving definition of justice at this point of the dialogue is that justice is each class of citizen doing the job for which they are suited and have been selected to do without interfering with the job of others.
Correct.
Right, doing what is yours and not interfering with what is not yours. And carefully pointing out that their work should not be impeded by others, and they should not be impeding the work of others. And that's how they defined justice. And so then, in order to now look at justice at the level of an individual, Socrates draws a direct line between the three classes in the city with the three elements of the soul that he enumerates. At the top, what he would call the rational element, okay? And then below that, which would be, well, the rational element would be analogous to the rulers. And then you've got the spirited element, which would be analogous to the guardians and the auxiliary. And this is the part that is in charge of essentially supporting the rational element when things are going the way they should. And then finally, at the bottom level, you've got what is analogous to the worker and production class of the city, what's called the appetitive element, which this is where you have essentially the irrational desires, things that are outside the scope of rationality, things like thirst, hunger, the desire for sex, which we will talk about a little bit in book 5. And so when all of these are in harmony, when there is a ordered, harmonious, balanced regulation of the three within the soul, then that is what justice is. So justice at the level of the individual is when you have an ordered regulation of the three. So the rational element is, with the support of the spirited element, channeling the appetites appropriately in a way, and they're not interfering with one another, meaning you don't have the appetitive elements driving decision-making. You have rational elements doing so with the support of the spirited element.
So an example for the individual would be you decide on your action of what you're going to do based on whether this is in accordance with virtue, as opposed to whether it's in accordance with what makes you feel better in that moment.
Right.
So taking up a job that pays well just because you can buy a German car, as opposed to participating in a profession that is involved in the common good.
Yeah.
So those would be that would be an example.
Right. That'd be an example. And in abstract terms, you could say focusing purely on what is right to do, doing what is good, not what feels good. Is another way to put it.
All right.
And so then you could think of injustice as sort of a rebellion or a civil war within these three classes within the individual.
Right.
So when you have the appetites co-opting the spirited elements in order to overthrow the rational element, i.e. making decisions that are based purely off of the pursuit of pleasure without regard to the rational element, that would be injustice. And so we actually didn't talk about this part of it, but book 4 ends with Socrates talking about virtue as a type of health, like a health of the soul. He says that it is a fine and good state of the soul. And so since justice is what allows for the other three virtues to arise, it is a necessary element of virtue which leads to health of the soul, i.e. well-being or eudaimonia. And so the question that Thrasymachus asked at the very beginning of the dialogue as to whether it's better to do injustice or to be just is now rendered ridiculous, because in the mind of Socrates, as he's reasoned through this with the use of this analogy of the Republic, it's like asking whether you're better off doing healthy actions or unhealthy actions. So Socrates has basically said that it is not better to do injustice because being unjust or unjust actions require and promote disease or weakness of the soul. And furthermore, it is better to be just because it requires and promotes the health of the soul, i.e. well-being. So just action, he says, engenders health, and unjust action engenders disease. So here Socrates begins to then begin to enumerate the vices, which would be the opposites of virtue, and then he gets cut off. And then we move into book 5.
Yeah. It's very interesting though. Just to start of book 5 is about the 5 types of soul, or the 5 types of a constitution. And so I want to make sure that, I state my point about the fact that this is about, the self. It's about the individual. And the 5 types of mind and the 5 types of constitution it's not that the book talks about the 5 types of constitution and that this is how you should form your constitution or form your republic. This book, I believe, talks more about this is how you should order your mind or order your soul. And what you can find in the world, though, are these other 5 types of minds that you may have to come up against.
Archetypes.
Or another way to look at it is these 5 types of minds actually exist inside of you. There are innumerable types of minds that exist inside of you, but there are 5 that he talks about, which are akin to these 5 types of constitution. But before he gets down into describing them, he gets cut off, like you said, right? Because of something that he had said, which you and me both kind of glossed over back then. I don't
even think we. What's funny is that we committed the same
exact thing that Socrates.
we took the same maneuver Socrates did. He's like, I'm going to mention this and keep talking.
Right?
And Socrates has to complain. So basically, what happens is Adeimantus interrupts Socrates and says, "Whoa!" So it seems like the discussion is finally coming to fruition. They're talking about the elements of justice at the level of the individual. Thrasymachus' claim is now being systematically addressed directly. And essentially, they say, wait a minute. Way back when you were talking about the guardians, you said that in regards to the women and children, they should follow the old saying, which is that everything is common among friends. Like, what do you mean by that? And Socrates says, well, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me about that because I think this is going to open a whole other can of worms. And it does, actually.
So before you go there, I want to say that this is the beauty of Plato, right? This is all Plato. This is all Plato bringing up an argument. He makes the argument. He makes the reader forget about the argument. And then he says, whoa, wait a minute, reader. Remember I had said that?
Right.
How did you just gloss over that?
Right.
Let me talk to you about that some more. It's just amazing, man.
Yeah, it reminds me of like old Shakespearean maneuvers, sort of like, Julius Caesar, where Mark Antony is giving his speech and he talks about the will of Julius Caesar and he leads everyone down the path and everybody's about to hear the ending and he's like, but let me go back to the will. Anyway, so it's Plato. Obviously, Plato preceded Shakespeare, but the quote that he's talking about is if you go back to 424a, he says here, so again, Socrates sort of weaves this quietly into his discussion and then quickly moves on. But when he's talking about the importance of the education upbringing of the guardians, for if a good education makes them moderate men, they will easily discover all of this for themselves and everything else that we are now omitting, such as the possession of women, marriages, and the procreation of children, and how all these must be governed as far as possible by the old proverb that friends share everything in common. And so what happened was the interlocutors say they're going to pin down Socrates and say, what exactly did you mean by that?
So before we go down that path, we have to say that this book was written, 2,000 years ago. And for its time, what is being discussed here is revolutionary. That where we are right now, this is actually in a way incendiary in many ways, shapes. When I read it, it brings about feelings of kind of disgust. You look at like what society was like and how, what their thoughts were about women. But this was 2,000 years ago that this book was written. The way society has treated women, it hadn't changed much till very recently. Right. And there are still some cultures right now where women are treated like they are talking about at their time, 2,000 years ago. I mean, that goes to show how little wisdom we have gained in all of these years. And one of the things that I want to say is when we go through this, there are some things that Socrates says, that Plato says, that we would look at it right now and say this guy was a misogynist, right? Or an elitist. There were things that were said, in the last 100 years that were far worse than this. You see what I mean?
Yeah, no, I agree.
In this realm. And so before we cast shade on Plato, I want the listeners and even you and me to just think about what life was like 2,000 years ago. There's no reason for him to have written this unless he truly believed it and what a revolutionary he was. So let's just...
Yeah, no, I just want to underscore what you're saying. I agree. There's the risk of being a presentist or like applying present values to something that was written 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago is problematic because you have to understand that people are of their time. Mm-hmm. Okay, and Socrates, whoever you're talking about, it's impossible to not be of your time. You may have forward-thinking ideas, and Socrates outlines some here that actually are very revolutionary for the time. But at the same time, he uses language that describes women. I mean, they talk about slaves without batting an eye. So we have to understand that we're hearing voices that are embedded in a certain combination of conventions. And I think it's really short-sighted to hold retroactive accountability to some degree. I'm not a historical relativist, but at the same time, you have to use your judgment and understand that people are of their time. And so at that point is very well taken. And I don't think it in any way diminishes or devalues or discounts the ideas that they're putting forth. Sure. And obviously that's what we're going to talk about. So then Socrates, after being wrestled down and forced to discuss this by his interlocutors, in fact, all three of them actually gang up on him, right?
Let me put it this way. The fact that he put an exclamation point on this, right, and made this scenario where Socrates is being pinned down, and you read these, you realize he's actually wants to weasel out of it. He doesn't want to talk about it. That shows that how important Plato thought that this was, that how revolutionary this was. You see what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know.
Like, he wanted to get out of it,
right?
But he didn't. He pinned himself down and discussed it. That goes to show how important he believes this was. I don't know how else to say it.
Right. It was clearly, it was not in alignment with the convention at the time.
Right.
And for that reason, it smacked of kind of the, superficially and without understanding the point of their conversation. This could be looked at as part of the corrupting activities that Socrates ended up being accused, tried, and found guilty of. I mean, this is the kind of stuff, but, so Socrates had prudence. He understood that, okay, I may have these ideas, but just because I have them doesn't mean that this is the best time and place to discuss them. But it really took the encouragement, to put it lightly, or the demand of his interlocutors to say, well, no, we need you to explain this.
You need to tell us about this.
So then in regards to women and children, an explanation of the sharing, how the sharing will be arranged is required, is essentially what they tell him. And so Socrates here moves into something called the guard dog analogy, which is sort of, if you have guard dogs, wouldn't you have the female guard dogs guarding the same thing as the male guard dogs, right? And so wouldn't you want them to guard the same thing? And he says,
but yes. Before he gets there, the question is, how do you get to this guard dog position, right? So, because I think that transition, I think, is key, and talks a lot about how I believe that Plato is sowed the seeds of feminism very early on, right? With this, what he says.
But I don't think you could claim he's a feminist, right?
No, right. But he sowed the seeds of it, but based on this conversation where it's going. But it took 2,000 years and still things didn't change, right? That shows that how much we should go back and read the source. Look at the source documents. What does wisdom say? Wisdom says these ideas, and we'll talk about this, right? He says that he goes into that. Right. So he talks first about the role of women in society. Mm-hmm. Okay. He says, do you believe that there is, in fact, a difference between men and women? And they say, yes, there are differences between men and women. Men are suited to certain tasks and women are suited to these other tasks. He says, well, that is one way of looking at it. Right? There's one way of looking at it. If we divide, yes, there is a difference between a man and a woman. There's some very specific things that separate them. But what we are talking about may not necessarily involve those two things, right? There are things that have got nothing to do with the fact that one is a man and one is a woman, that both of them are capable of performing that task. Then he says, okay, let's look at a guard dog analogy, right? Our guardians, this is about the guardians. Our guardians are in a way like guard dogs, right? For the purpose of guarding, right? It doesn't matter if one is a male guard dog or a female guard dog. They can both guard, right? So that's how they come to that.
All right, they come to it.
About equality. This is kind of about, there are certain things that both men and women can do equally.
Yeah,
there's not one suited for another.
In a way, he sort of stumbles into equality. But what he's doing is
I should say it's not exactly equal though. It'll come down here. We'll talk about
what he's doing is he's separating the pursuit from features of the individual that have nothing to do with that pursuit. He's essentially putting priority on the task and the natures required to perform that task optimally. And what Socrates is saying is that there may be factors here that have no bearing whatsoever. So what he states is that it just so happens that whether you're a man or a woman has no bearing to determine your nature and how fitted your nature is to a particular pursuit, and in this case of guarding.
Yes.
And so he moves on to say, if we employ women for the same task as men, they must be taught the same things, given the same education and the same training. So there now you start to see the kind of the language of equality in which you call sort of the very quasi-protoplasmic beginnings of feminism. But what he points out, because they start talking about like we're going to be ridiculed, we're talking about men and women doing the same job, but he points out that even if it's contrary to custom and despite ridicule, you must follow reason where it goes.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be one of the salient points here when we start talking about at the level of the individual, because we look at the Republic as how to order your mind. I think that's the main point.
And so they actually make a reference to something that comes up all the time, right? We talk about equality. You'll find many different arguments. Some are very nuanced and, arguments, but then there are crude arguments that are made. Oh, so, women in the armed forces, so what? Are they going to, how are they going to mix with the men? Like what's that going to look like? Right. Can you think a woman could...
what are the physical standards going to be?
And not just, sometimes it gets even more crude than that, right? Like in a war situation, like, how are they going to bathe? How are they going to toilet? How are they going to do these kind of things? And there's crude humor that's attached to it, right? We immediately go, when you talk about like an elite, like forces, armed forces, instead of talking about can a woman participate as an elite armed forces personnel, we immediately go to what exactly is the difference between a man and a woman, right? The sexual characteristics of it, as opposed to the intent, the purpose, the ability,
the pursuit, how well fitted the nature is to the pursuit, right?
And so they talk about back in the day, physical exercise was a big part of the nobility and the warrior class, and they would perform these exercises in the nude in gymnasia, right? And so they straight up go there. It's like, that is crude humor to talk about. So now you're going to have men and women work out together. What if, you have, old men and old women, what would that look like? And he's like, that is crude humor. That's like, it is, this is what Socrates says. And this showed that it is a fool who finds anything ridiculous except what is bad. Okay. Or tries to raise a laugh at the sight of anything except what is stupid or bad. Or, putting it another way around, who takes seriously any standard of what is beautiful other than what is good. Now think about that, right? If you have...
He's saying think before you laugh at something. Like, before when somebody gives you an unconventional idea, examine it before you scoff at it.
Right.
And it would take wisdom, prudence, virtue to realize that certain ideas warrant examination and maybe even adoption.
Correct.
But somebody who would scoff at the notion without examining it, in a way, perpetuates their own ignorance.
And also, that's right. And the crudeness of it. It's like
it's boorish.
It's kind of a narrative against like insult comics.
Yeah.
Right. What he's talking about is you're looking at a male form or a female form. Don't look at the age of it. Look at the purpose of it. Don't look at the form of it, but look at the function of it.
Right.
Right. And that is what he's trying to say, that you can come up with all these crude remarks about how they're gonna, look, or what that process is going to be. But look at what it's being done for, and you see the beauty and the function and the form in it.
Yeah. So basically, when you make a cheap shot, you're hurting yourself.
Yes, but
you're showing your own ignorance.
Correct, but it more so when it becomes this kind of a dialogue. So he talks about this, right? Like you and me can have a conversation, and your role could be to just be an insult comic, just to create to counter my points without an aim to actually find the truth. Right? He says this is not a dialectic conversation.
That's a great point. Right. So
you could distract me by talking about nonsense, about crude. You can use crude humor and distract the audience, distract me from, rather than trying to use prudence or use rational thinking to come to the truth. Go ahead, sorry.
It would make more sense for two people to cooperate and say, well, let's understand what is the right and true and good thing here. And to the extent that you've both agreed to cooperate, there would be no room for this sort of ridicule. And if it did exist, it would really be a result of ignorance, essentially. So then Socrates, and again, what I'm summarizing is that the city follows the principle that its citizens are assigned, based on their nature, to their appropriate pursuits. And those suited to be guardians become guardians. Those suited to be in medicine go into medicine. Socrates talks about, well, if a man and a woman are suited to be physicians, should it matter that one is a woman and one is not? And the answer is no, because the features that make them suited to medicine have nothing to do with these factors about their biology and other physical factors that have no bearing whatsoever on the pursuit. So it's all about the task, it's all about the role, and not about factors that are not directly related to that.
Correct. So he says that it's based on their nature, right? So he says, is the nature in men, right? If there's a nature of someone who's a physician and there's a nature of someone who's a shoemaker, right? And so those two things, it doesn't matter if that's a man or not, his nature is different. So one can be a shoemaker, one can be a physician, you cannot interchange them, right? But there is no such difference in a man and a woman when it comes to being a physician. It doesn't matter if that one is a man and the other is a woman. If that's their nature, then they are suited for the job.
Because the other way to look at it is the pursuit doesn't care.
That's right. Of whether you're a man or a woman. They're just saying if you have what it takes to be one, you can be one.
The craft and skill of shoemaking, to use their analogy, doesn't care if the shoemaker is bald or has hair. Socrates talks about that too.
And he says this, can it be then that a woman is not by nature very different from a man?
Right.
I mean, the woman is the same as a man.
Yeah.
When it comes to nature. Now, physical capability and all that, there's a difference.
There's a difference. And one of them has the capability of producing children, which they account for. Yeah. But aside from that difference, as far as being fitted to the pursuit, men and women are no different.
And so what they're saying is, if by nature, if their natures are the same, the man who can be a guardian, a woman can be a guardian. There is no difference, essentially. So coming back to the guard dog analogy, you won't only choose the male dogs to be guard dog.
Right.
Female dogs are as good as guard dogs.
Right.
Because it's got nothing to do with the fact that one is a male or a female. It's got to do with the nature of them being guard dogs.
So essentially what's happening is that Socrates is pointing out that this selection process is and must be based on the features of an individual's nature that are pertinent to the pursuit itself. Thus, bald or long hair is not a factor with respect to shoemakers, since it's not pertinent to shoemaking. Further, man or woman, whether you're a man or woman, is not a factor since it's not permanent to the guardianship role. And since a man and a woman can have the same nature, women can be guardians.
It's so logical, right?
Right.
It's like saying just because you're tall or short, it's got nothing to do with you being a doctor. Right?
Exactly.
So it shouldn't have to go, the same thing should be true for a man or a woman.
Right. So very revolutionary idea. And here, as I was reading this the first time, I was thinking, wow, Socrates, ahead of his time. Men and women are equal. And then he takes this like eugenic turn. Because then he starts talking about...
Actually, before you go to eugenics though, because this is stuff. I couldn't resolve the eugenics idea. I have some theories. but I could not resolve it. And so
yeah, we'll talk about it. But
but before we go there, I want to talk about this. So because I have to do justice to the fact, then you also have to, I guess, is that this has got nothing to do with creating a society of equals. This is about ordering your own thoughts inside of your mind. So where are we going with men and women and their roles inside of the mind of the republic of my mind? Right. Do you have a theory? It looks like it. Does your theory come after the eugenics theory?
Well, yeah. I mean, because what it boils down to is we're reading a dialogue where Socrates is essentially building a hypothetical city and talking about how it's going to run. And then we are interpreting it as the analogy that it is within the dialogue itself. Now, what I can't say or can't know is whether Socrates himself believed that a city should actually be built and run this way. That I can't prove. I think he probably does, but I will say when I read Socrates, I'm not saying I follow lockstep with all of his ideas, but I did find that when we reached this area, there was, for me, divergence for several reasons. Not just because of the tone and the inflammatory aspects of what he's talking about. And I'll get into it later, but I think he deviates from his own conceptual model of the soul in this, and I'll talk about why later.
You think so, man? That's what an
that's
out is
bold,
that?
right?
Yeah, that's an out. You're taking an out.
No, I'm not taking it out. I'm not taking it out. I'll tell you.
You know what? Then I'm going to hold off on my theory right now. Let's go to the eugenics. I want to see what you have to say.
I'm describing it as a eugenic term, but again, I'm understanding that this is an analogy, B, a discussion that's happening 2,000 years ago. And C, we can't be presentists. We can't impose our current values to something 2,000 years ago. Because they talk about things like infanticide, and that apparently was common practice in Greece. Man. So that's obviously not something that's in common practice now. So we actually have to make large accommodations for the fact that, again, that these individuals are embedded in their time. And so what we need to do is extract what's useful. And there's gold here. I mean, there is gold. But we also have to take it in context. And I think it's wrong, especially when you're looking at the scale of 2 millennia. We're not talking about last year. We're not talking about 10 years ago or 50 years ago. But 2,000 years ago, I think I'd be hard pressed to say that this disqualifies the concepts that he's talking about.
Yeah, I agree. I think the disclaimers are important. We should keep giving them. But let's go ahead. Let's start with eugenics. So at least before we go to eugenics, what we have established is that it is not about ownership of women. The women are not property. And what he's talking about here is that women are shoulder to shoulder with men when it comes to to roles, the roles that help govern the ideal republic. Right. Where the guardians are men and then there are guardian women. There are worker men and there are worker women, and there are philosopher men and there are philosopher women. Right. So it depends upon where you are based on your nature, you are fitted there. Right. Now, but just like how it is for men, where men of a certain, if I make the correlative thoughts of a certain character or of a certain metal, cannot assume the role of a philosopher if they're of a bronze thought. The same thing holds true for the genders. Neither of the genders can supersede their metal, right? So we have established that. So now you have a situation where you have guardians who are men and guardians who are women. And now the women have to be trained the exact same way. Mm-hmm. They have to undergo the same exact training. It's got nothing to do with the fact that they are a man or woman. Anybody who's a guardian has to go through the same training. Right. Actually have no effect. Right. In fact, what Socrates has done is he's made male versus female an irrelevant demographic variable. Correct. He said, can you do the job? Yeah. It's a pure meritocracy. So now what should that look like? What should their life look like? He does understand that there is a difference between men and women, and then that there's sexual attraction. If you've got to group men and women together, train them, there is going to be eventual things that are going to happen. But remember, he's answering the question why women and children should be held in common. So he's walking us through the logical steps. So he started off with, it's all about the nature and how you're fitted to your pursuit and nothing else. So that's step one. Step two is, what I call the eugenic turn. And so he starts talking about, okay, now at this point we must understand
that the city should have, this is what he's saying, should have the best possible men and women. And so we should promote, very, very much like animal husbandry, to put it bluntly, the promotion of breeding or procreation of the best and the best, that should be promoted. And there should be some system of suppressing procreation of the worst with the worst for the good of the city. And so here he moves on to say that in this case, that wives should be shared and children should not know who their parents are. In fact, that the children should be sequestered at birth and sent off for a special rearing, and that no mother will recognize their own offspring in this system. So again, now this is where we start talking about inflammatory things. And so this sounds very extreme, but what Socrates begins to enumerate after this is the logic behind why would you go through the trouble? Why would you go through the trouble of masking the relationship between parents and their children?
Before you go there, I want to say something though, like what you said, right? Like the sharing of wives is such a like a yucky thing to talk about.
Held
right?
in common.
Let me put it this way: it's almost like it's not about. It is this topic. This conversation is a man with other men. First of all, right? We have to say that. Like back 2,000 years ago, there was not a single woman present in this audience, right? Mm-hmm. That goes to show that there was none of this. There was all this equality that Plato talked about was just a revolutionary thought and was not part of society. Women were subjugated. Women were, they weren't provided the education, weren't given any opportunity, right? In that situation, they talk about sharing of wives, right? But in his republic, that is not the case. Women are given every opportunity that the man has based on their nature. That's a good point,
right? And so I think
in this situation, there is no sharing of wives. There's actually there is no sharing of husbands. There is just a common. It's just a common presence. There is no, because you would like to think when you say sharing. How do husbands and wives exist? There's no sharing of women. Women are property. Women are in the republic, in the ideal republic. Right. They form the ruling principle. They are the guardians. They are the workers. They are in all aspects of society. No one owns another person in this. Right. So there is no sharing. There is just this common being.
Right. And so the rationale behind Socrates' idea here, though, is he says that, if the men and women guardians do not recognize their own children, he's doing it as a means to promote unity. Yes. What he's done is he's prioritized the unity of the guardians above all. And it points simply out to the fact that if you don't know who your child is, that has a biological result of you assuming that everyone is your child. And he says that is the way it should be. That is the unity that you would need at the guardianship. Because once you've achieved that level of unity, then you no longer have people saying that something is mine or something is not mine. Everything at that point is shared. And what it does, again, his argument, is has this harmonizing effect at the level of the guardians, because they no longer have any motivations for favoritism. They have no motivations for, all the things that lead to discord and disharmony, right?
Right. If you distill it down, when it comes to injustice only happens when I have what I believe is mine and you feel that I have what you believe is yours. Right. And so then that leads to this feeling of injustice, right? For you toward me, you'd be like, he owns what is actually rightfully mine. But if you live in a society in which we don't have, there is no ownership of these things, then there is no yours and mine. And then there's no need for having laws and all those things to govern that, because we mutually participate.
Right. So if a child gets sick, everyone's child is sick.
Correct.
Right. Or if somebody gets injured, everyone's family member was injured. It promotes that level of unity.
And of all the things that you would own or you think are yours, right? Own is not the right word, but I think are yours. Mm-hmm. If anyone has kids, they know that is one that you have the biggest, strongest, tightest bond toward. You'll do anything for your kids is what they say, right?
Right.
And
so remember you said that, because when I talk to you about what I want to bring up later, I think I agree with that completely. So Socrates says, so if the wives are held in common, to use his phrase, then that allows for the best, breeding with the best, and for the suppression of the worst, breeding with the worst being undertaken.
Same thing is true if the husbands are not held in common.
That is
what
true.
I'm trying to say is that husbands and wives, the
It goes
concept
both
in his
ways.
republic doesn't exist.
Right.
Right.
And he says, so if the children are shared, what that does is it promotes the unity because it would nullify attempts of favoritism since all children are potentially, in quotes, one's own. And thus you would act towards all under the presumption of ownership. They are yours. There's a familial connection which promotes harmony, which would have this unifying effect. And it would discourage specifically what he mentions faction forming,
Right.
which is problematic. And faction forming leads to division and disunity, which is what you want to move away from. That is one of those terrible things that the Guardians would turn away from. And then so it also ensures, the sharing of educational resources
Right.
and that sort of thing. So now I'm going to stop here and say, how do we interpret this at the individual level? If this is an analogy, if this is a metaphor for the mind, what the hell does men and women having shared children, and what the hell does these concepts, how does that translate into how do you order your own
Your mind, yeah. So I want to
So-
hear your thoughts first because I was about to go first, but you stopped me. So I want you to go
You
first.
want me to go first?
Yes.
Okay.
Go first. Go forth.
Okay, so here's how I interpret the analogy at the individual level. We have been talking from the beginning about citizens being thoughts. Okay. And so we have bronze thoughts, silver thoughts, and gold thoughts. And so if the citizens are thoughts, then the procreation and the children of those citizens, when you take thoughts and combine them, to use a strange language, when thoughts have sex, okay, when thoughts gets exchanged, now that can happen within the mind or among minds, right? Because you exchange thoughts with people and people. And so the procreation of children, that is where ideas and beliefs come from. And so ideas and beliefs, just like the thoughts, just like when citizens were assigned to the fitness for the pursuit and nothing else, then the thoughts and their results should be assessed by the same criteria, how well it is suited to its pursuit. And in particular, the pursuit of virtue and well-being, and not at all their source, meaning somebody could say something, and if I'm ignorant, I will actually potentially, if I'm very ignorant, not listen to what they're saying because of something that has nothing to do about what they're saying. Meaning somebody could tell me something very lucid, but if for some reason I have a bias or a prejudice, not take it. What I have done there is not matched the nature of that thought with its intent pursuit. I missed that opportunity. So looking at the merits of the thoughts, I think is what this is an analogy for. Okay. And so when you get thoughts through idea exchanges with other people, others, books, your own contemplation and in conversation and in reading material like this, looking at their thoughts for their own merit, with merit ultimately being how well the nature of the thought is fitted to noble or virtuous pursuits. And that's how I see it. That's how I analogize this scenario in my mind. Because think about it, thoughts rarely just sort of exist in a vacuum. They'll bounce off other thoughts and they'll form ideas and in fact inform beliefs, and those are all influence decisions. So what you want to do is promote the procreation essentially of gold thoughts, and you want to suppress the procreation of bronze thoughts or thoughts that don't serve you. What do you think of that?
No, not surprising. We came to a similar sort of an understanding of what this is, or similar sort of an explanation. I would say I agree with the thought that this is.
Is your mic still on?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
The fact that this is that this is about thoughts. That this is not about, when you talk about children and men and women, these are actually all thoughts. And that procreation is this idea of creating thoughts inside of your mind, and then how those thoughts influence you and bring about action is what this is all about. The question about what's a male and a female thought?
I don't think it has anything to do. See, that I think at some level the analogy is no longer an analogy. Like, I think male and female is the source of the thought. So for example, it wouldn't matter if a good thought came to you from a female author or a male author, or a male friend or a female friend, or somebody you don't know who you're talking to is male or female. The fact that they're male or female does not influence the merit of the thought, right?
Yeah. Now,
and it would be ignorant, though, to ascribe.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
What I'm saying?
I got that flavor of what you're saying.
Context,
it's like saying that because this came from a female author, I'm going to discredit it, or this came from a male author, so I'm going to discredit it.
Right.
But now that is your mind bouncing against other minds that exist. But
because you have to do it within yourself as well.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So now,
begin to.
So what does that look like inside of you?
People rationalize bad ideas with what appears to be sound logic. And
I do it all the time.
Right. So you say, well, again, I had a bad day. I need to do something to de-stress. I'm going to have that donut, or to use your example, right? So that's what's happening at that point is actually, that's probably not that good of an analogy at that point. I really think it has to do with ignoring the source of the thought and focusing on the merit of the thought. Because as soon as you start focusing on the source of the thought, you miss the opportunity for the accumulation of knowledge, which could lead to wisdom.
This is tough, man. This is not easy to do. And whatever explanation we come up with, I think we'll come up with a different one if we maybe on a reread.
And this is why I'm not sure that Socrates was actually proposing a structural composition for an actual state to be like this.
Yeah. I've always said that. Like, I don't think that's
right.
This is not about
this is why I came to the same conclusion when I read through it. I was like, my idea is that again, I'm a little bit agnostic about what Socrates was thinking. Actually, I'm not a little bit. I'm totally agnostic. I don't know what Socrates is thinking. I don't know if he actually believed that this is how the city should be, or if this is just his analogy to answer the question about what justice is. But suffice to say, my interpretation of this is going to be how you order the mind.
Sure.
And obviously, that metaphor can be taken to a certain degree, that certain level of granularity. But at some point, I mean, because they talk about, the different types of music and poetry.
Right.
Those are not literal interpretations at the level that we're taking it. We're talking about, the media, the information that you take in, right?
Right. So you have to, I see what you mean. I think using this as a way to describe common property or common ownership or the common good, this is a great way to show how common good can exist. A very practical, logical way of showing how common good can exist. If we all have stake in the same exact thing, that is what common good is. So there are multiple levels of looking at this, and every reread, I think, is going to bring us closer. And so this may be very preliminary, maybe very uninformed, like the ideas we're coming up with right now. But that's fine. That's the journey. Every time, that's why you can reread these things several times and come up with a different.
This book I read the slowest. It was because while I was reading it, and I wish I hadn't, but while I was reading it, I was thinking to myself, how am I going to turn this into how I'm using this information?
Yeah.
Where is the analogy in my own mind for this?
So
this is what I came up with.
Yeah. So then my theory of this is that I actually took them to be the masculine and feminine tendencies that exist in all of us. Now, just because one is a male doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have in ourselves female tendencies. And just because one is a female doesn't mean that they don't have in them male tendencies. We've seen this. The nature to ambition is present equally in men and women. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. The nature of child rearing is also present in men and women, both. But it is much higher in women than it is in men. Empathy is sometimes found to be different as well. So there are all of these tendencies that do exist. We see that in our own minds, right? We are at the same time as men. And this is one of the few times I feel like it'll be so nice to actually have a woman and get their perspective, right? Maybe we should do that. Maybe we should invite someone to kind of, maybe have a conversation with this exact chapter and see what they have to say about it. It'll be very interesting to see. But I can say as a man, right? And I cannot say, what it is to be inside the mind of a woman. It's still a mystery to me, right? But what I can say for a man, I see inside of myself both masculine and feminine tendencies, especially since I've become a father. I see them both, right? And there is ambition to be the best at my profession, and there is an ambition to be the best as a father. You see what I mean? It's got nothing to do with me being a man for either of those two things. It is my nature to do both of those things, right? But I can marry my ambition to be the best dad with providing everything that my kids ask. Everything. You want the latest gadget? Boom. You want, go on this great vacation? Boom. And the ambition to make my kids really happy by giving them everything is marrying my ambition as a guardian for being a better parent to my ambition as a worker to procure and get things. And they don't necessarily align to create the ideal republic inside of my family. I want my family to be temperate. And the courage there is to deny some things that my kids ask for, and it makes me feel bad as a parent saying no to them. But denying that, so holding steadfast of what is in fact evil, right? And what is in fact good, and bringing about whatever's required, that is my role as a guardian parent, right? And now there is a guardian ambition as well that requires me to go out and do my job as a provider for my family, right? My role as a parent could say I should stay at home and, be involved in all aspects of child rearing and not go to work. Like, why am I going to work? Because that part of my soul says that I need to go out and procure and provide. Now, that part that says I will provide all the money there is, I'll make my kids the richest that they can ever be, I'm going to give them all this money. That ambition has to be tempered from the fact that this is not about making your kids rich. It's about making them become better citizens in the world by doing what they're supposed to do. They need to pay their dues. They need to work hard. They cannot be given everything handed to them on a platter, right? Because that's what struggling and suffering is what kind of makes you wiser. You have to kind of get upon that. So my ambition to get as much money has to be countered by my ambition to actually create well-rounded kids. Now, this is just a very simple example of how a parent and ambition can kind of come together, and where you can look at bronze thought and gold thought. So imagine if I have the ambition to be a parent, a good parent, whatever that means, right? That has to be governed by wisdom. What is good parenting? What is good providing? That has to be governed by the rational principle, right? And now I marry the two together. I marry the thought of being a provider with the thought of being a child bearer or rarer. And that marriage is a much better marriage than a marriage of the lesser thoughts. But that is again inside of my mind. It's got really not that much to do with the presence of a thought coming from the outside, like that, my gosh, your kids don't have the latest iPhone. I don't care whether the iPhone exists or doesn't exist. What is in fact the alignment of an individual to good. It's my job to rear children who are going to participate in the common good or have an ordered republic inside of them, right? So, should my children be participating in reading philosophy? Maybe, right? Maybe that's what I need to be focusing on, as opposed to worrying about whether they have the latest iPhone or not, or whether they get a private school education or not, or whether they drive around in a BMW or not. You see what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. So what you're saying, so if I understand you correctly, what you take from this is that there are, and correct me if I'm wrong, so you're saying that there is what you could call a traditionally masculine sphere of action, decision-making, and thought, and then there's a feminine sphere of action, decision-making, and thought, and that individuals can inhabit both spheres to different degrees, and a lot of it is informed by the traditional norms of our society. So
yes, so you're right.
So I was going to say, Aneesh, remember, 2,000 years from now, someone's going to listen to this podcast and be like, "Man, that Aneesh." That was way off base.
Yeah.
Talking about masculine?
Okay. No, so I'm not saying that. So these are natures that are they're not at the rational level. These are at the lizard brain level, right?
Right.
So there are processes.
Well, there's
inside.
a social level to it too, but I don't think it's
I'm talking about more about the. See, when I look at the mind, I look at the medullary, the midbrain, the hindbrain, the midbrain part,
right.
And then the prefrontal cortex part, right? I don't think the prefrontal cortex part is that's not where these masculine and feminine things come from. They come from the lower parts of the brain. These are just ordered into our mind, just evolutionarily. We're just built that way to think about this. But so we are calling them masculine and feminine based on, you're right, societal norms. Right? But I don't think that, like 200,000 years ago, I don't think it was much different. Like the caveman or the cave woman didn't think that these were predominantly men's roles and women's roles. They were just programmed to do certain things. And in my mind, if I go back and if I take away the societal norms that come with it, I can also kind of see those different aspects inside of me. Right?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So, yeah, and I think in a way it can get even more complex because, I mean, full disclosure, my background is in obstetrics and gynecology. And as it happens, part of what I've done just to better myself and my interactions with women, because all my patients are women, or identify as women, then, there's a real debate even within, because you can read feminist philosophy and understand that there's a whole range there of different ideas. And I think one of the things that struck me about the feminist experience, or the perspective of women in this world, is that they face very, very different, and I would say perhaps more variable, more vulnerable, more precarious challenges than we do as men, because there's so much of their identity that is influenced by, I guess, societal expectations. And even within for example, so, I mean, if you read feminist philosophy, you can read one position. Naomi Wolf would be a good read if you're interested, who says that women are essentially being coerced by societal norms and they should resist. Very lucid, very rational position. But then ironically, right after that, there's another one, Camille Paglia. She would point out that women should do whatever they want. It's a very sort of internally focused, and say if a woman wants to get plastic surgery, it doesn't matter that it's social norms that are inducing her to do so. It's her own prerogative. So there's both sides to all that. And what it means to me is that they have a very different experience than we do. And I think what you're saying does resonate with me. But I agree. I think one day we should have a woman on the show.
You definitely should. Because if you follow this chain of argument, they're saying that. They are saying that when it comes to the natures, there's not that much difference between men and women, right? There is no difference, is what they're saying. When it comes to certain natures,
pursuits, right?
Yes,
when you're identifying a role, it's like,
when I say nature, I mean I'm talking about from the governing of the republic. When the ordering of the mind is the same for you and for me as it would be for a woman, you and me being men and women. But the ordering of the mind is the same. This is read the same way, and the same things apply to them, to women and to men alike, right? So if we understand what eudaimonia is, right, the happiness over the entire lifespan of somebody, right? A happy life, not happiness inside of it, but happiness with the whole total sum of it. That means the pursuit of purpose, in a way, right? Of aligning yourself with virtue. The same process, that process is indifferent of gender. And the only way that it becomes indifferent of gender, right, is when things that are very specific to each gender are removed from the process.
Right.
Otherwise, if in order to achieve eudaimonia, you have to have given birth, men are excluded from eudaimonia. Right? So this part what I'm talking about is you are asexual. When you're pursuing eudaimonia, you're asexual as a being. But that doesn't mean that you don't have male or female tendencies inside of you.
Right. You have to accept. Right. You have to accept your biological drives.
Masculine, feminine.
Right. So
this is a way for you to order your mind when you are dealing with those thoughts. That's how I looked at it. Now, when I read on a reread, I might find that my theory.
So let me summarize my interpretation again, because then I want to move on to what I'm calling my critique. So again, virtuous thoughts should be selected for consciously and intentionally, and may direct you. This is the other take-home point. As you do so, virtuous thoughts should be selected for consciously and intentionally and may direct you in conflict with convention. It's exactly what happened to Socrates. He followed his own reasoning. And that's something we probably didn't talk enough about, is so much of life around us is convention. It's based off of presumptions, assumptions, biases. Mm-hmm. But if you live an examined life, you will run into convention and potentially be ridiculed and scoffed at. But somebody who's wise would hear your perspective and say, wait a minute, this is something we need to listen to based off of the merits of your idea, right? And so the convention is sometimes arbitrary and based on concepts that are not pertinent to their own pursuits or the pursuit of virtue. So one example would be a bias. For example, if those of a political party, if you think somebody of a political party is better than somebody from another political party, and ignoring their qualities as an individual, that's a classic example of ignoring how fit somebody's thoughts or ideas are to the pursuit of virtue. Mm-hmm. Because once you identify them as a member of a political party, well, now you're not listening, and that's problematic. So here's what because we're talking about. You brought up masculine and feminine, and the feminine sphere being one of nurture, right? So here's my question. Did Socrates throw the soul out of balance here? And here's why I ask this question. Because Socrates is talking about how there's a soul, there's a rational element, spirited element, and an appetitive element. The appetitive element, let's talk about that. The appetitive element would include your natural biological instincts, your drives, right? So Socrates is saying is that the rational element, with the support of the spirited element, should channel the appetitive drives. Because basically have rational regulation of the drives. But do you believe that it's possible to have a rational over-regulation of the drives? And the reason I ask this is because when I read this, with my experience as an obstetrician, the idea of sequestering children away from women, one of the reasons I feel like this would not be a viable plan is because that is an example in my mind of overreach, where you have the rational mind over-controlling what we call an appetitive drive, where you actually have a rational reason to pull, children, newborn babies away from their moms. In my mind, when I read that, I was like, well, good luck doing that. That is a very, very strong biological drive. And so it brought me to the idea that maybe this idea of self-mastery and having harmony between the rational, spirited, and appetitive drives has more to do with, yes, channeling the appetitive drives under rational control, but there can neither be over control of those biological drives.
Correct. So if you have over control, then you don't have an ordered republic.
Right. So it would be out of order. And so that's why I said,
and that's
think
where
Socrates threw the soul out of balance.
Also, then maybe not, right? Because the republic that he's talking about, there is no sense of injustice from the thoughts that are procreating and creating thoughts. They don't feel a sense of injustice when they are not being given any ownership of the product of the procreation, right? Now you have to, if you think about this as literally as babies being taken away from others, that creates it's a very tough visual to look away from. But let's think of these as what you said before, what we've been discussing. These are thoughts, right? These are thoughts that are coming up. My thoughts of performing actions from the standpoint of professional ambition and paternal ambition, the procreation of those thoughts and the thoughts that come from that, right? Saying that I'm going to ascribe to this way of thinking because this makes me a better dad, right? As opposed to, I'm going to ascribe to this way of thinking, are two very different ways of looking at the same problem. So if you have the fact that I'm a dad, or the fact that I'm a doctor, shouldn't have much to do with my decisions, what I make on a day-to-day basis. That should be governed by the fact that, am I practicing virtue? Am I participating in, do I understand what should bring fear and what should not, and what should be pursued? And that is what makes the decision. That's the apex principle. Whether I'm a father, whether I'm a physician, whether I'm a whatever, shouldn't factor as my leading principle. I'm not going to make this decision because I'm a father. I'm making this decision because it aligns with my rational principle. That means in order for that to happen, I have to disengage from this particular thing I'm doing because I'm a father. This thing I'm doing because I'm a physician. This thing I'm doing because I'm a husband. This I'm doing as a friend. This I'm doing as a podcast host or whatever, right?
So if I understand you correctly, then you don't believe Socrates threw the soul out of balance here, because what you're saying is the women guardians would willingly give up their children because they feel it's for a greater good.
They don't. In this case, what happens is their maternal instincts are given due precedence because they don't show up. So he talks about this, right? Like, they will show up to nurse, but they won't know which baby they are nursing. They will nurse a baby. Like the once a baby is born, the baby is taken away to a nursery, and all the children, the babies are kept in the common nursery. And the guardian women come to the nursery and they feed the children, and they spend time with the children, and then they leave, and then there are vet nurses who are actually taking care of them. So what's happening is that the infant is not being bereft of the mother is not bereft of the child. It's just that they don't know whether it's their child or someone else's child. So now that is a very, like,
that's
that,
still right.
See, that image is a very difficult image, right? I mean, come on, like, it's not. It doesn't.
I mean, it's not because I think it's necessarily a violent act, and I don't think it's necessarily an unjust. I just don't think it's sustainable. A woman, even
see, that's what they talk about. They talk about the viability of this. Is this a viable thing?
They struggle with this themselves.
Yeah, they struggle about viability.
I think the reason they struggled with it, I mean, I'll read it some more, but I think Socrates went. I don't know. I think he threw his soul out of the balance here, because I would put the maternal bond with their child right up with thirst. This would be like Socrates saying, well, in the Republic, the guardians are not going to drink fluids because it's an over restriction of the drive.
So I think that's where you're right. But when talk about logic, when I say you're right, it means that when we're trying to logically talk about the maternal bond, it's a really difficult thing to do because there is no logic there. Really,
right? It's totally irrational.
So
that's what I'm saying.
That is why it doesn't
rationalize something that is a purely irrational.
And you cannot. And so that's why he talks about that, right? Like, this is how you order your thinking. The bond that you have with your kids is the strongest one that you got. Most humans or most organisms have, is the strongest bond. And then how do you order that under the umbrella of the rational principle? Because a lot of people will say, forget justice. I'm going to do what is right by my kids. This is what I believe is what I need to do this for my kids. I will kill, stab, steal, usurp power, acquire wealth, and they do all this in the name of their children. This is one way for you to order yourself so that you can practice justice and still do what is best. As a matter of fact, practicing justice, when you practice justice, you do best for your kids, period. And procuring for them and going out of your way to borrow and steal and fight against the world to bring about injustice to someone else just so that you can provide for your kids actually leads down, it leads to deep, dark places.
I totally get that.
And the world is full of rife with examples of that. Right? So to your point, whether this is an overreach, if you just take mothers and children and babies and stuff out of this and look at it as thoughts, I don't believe that it is an overreach. It is a way for you to order your thoughts and ascribe a certain logical way of thinking. Obviously, much more difficult to do than to say. from the standpoint of creating a republic like this, I don't think it's viable.
Yeah, I don't think it's viable. But even at the level of the individual, I do think that, I don't know, I still think that I understand that the rational element and the spirited element should channel the drives, but they're even then, I think there's something ironic about self-mastery. Self-mastery has to acknowledge its own weaknesses, its own irrational drives. And I think you go out of balance when you overcorrect them. And this smacked of me when I first read it as that. But so then the next topic is going to be a little less controversial: war. So we're going to move on to the topic of war in the Republic.
I think readers should read this. Like anybody, so listeners should read this, because we need to look at it and read it, and look at the parts that will incense you and make you angry and all of that, and then try to make sense of it. Right.
If it's not challenging, why are you reading it? And this is challenging. This is going to challenge you.
This is challenging.
So yeah. And this challenge. If you're reading something that's challenging you, that means you're looking for thoughts that fit their purpose, that fit their pursuit. So there it is. All right, we'll leave it there.
All right, very well. Thank you.